Welcome to a new episode of the Straight Wrestling Voices of the Indies podcast. I'm your host Morbo, and with me, as always, everyone's favorite US independent wrestling fan, Sebastian.
Thank you as always for the introduction, Morbo, and welcome to this week's episode of Straight Wrestling Voices of the Indies. And our guest today is not only known from the Southeast independent wrestling scene of the United States from promotions like Action Wrestling or Southern World Championship Wrestling. He has also been to Germany before. He's appeared for WXW among other promotions, and we are really happy to have him as our guest today. And with that, thank you for taking the time to be our guest today, and welcome, Tyler "The Wall" Stevens.
Hey guys, thank y'all for having me.
So Tyler, for the people who don't know who you are, who is Tyler Stevens?
Tyler Stevens on the wall, Mr. Big Bad and Pretty. I have been wrestling I've been doing shows for 3 years now. I started training a little bit before the pandemic, so I started training in 2019. I'm just trying to wrestle everybody. I'm trying to go everywhere. I'm trying to do everything that I can do. So that's just a small tidbit of who I am.
Can you tell us how you get into wrestling as a fan, and also what fascinates you about wrestling?
Yeah, so as a child, I didn't have we didn't have cable at the house that I grew up at or anything like that. We didn't have internet at home. But I used to have like this giant bag of VHS tapes. My granddad used to record wrestling shows he would watch with my sister. And so I used to just watch these VHS tapes like endlessly. I would watch them and I'd rewind them and I'd watch them again. So I grew up watching a lot of like the Attitude Era, a lot of WCW from like 97, 98. That was kind of like the stuff that I was watching as a kid. So that's what really hooked me as a fan. And then, I discovered that I could watch SmackDown on like a local station or whatever. So I started watching that in probably 2007 or 8. Probably 2008, 2009, something like that. And I stayed with it ever since. The thing that fascinates me about wrestling is the stories that you tell and the connections that you make with different wrestlers. So, like, one of the big stories on SmackDown when I was a kid was Triple H and Jeff Hardy. While Jeff was trying to become World Heavyweight Champion and all the things that he had to go through to get to that point. So, that's a story from when I was younger that I distinctly remember that was very pivotal to me as far as enjoying wrestling.
Where does your nickname The Wall come from?
So my actual last name is Wall. So when I was a kid, I hated my last name. I thought it was really lame. Like it's 4 letters, it's 1 syllable. It's very just like boring. And so I wanted to make it something that I thought was cool. So that's just kind of where it came from.
Can you tell us who trained you and who are the people who had the most influence on your career so far?
Yeah, so my original trainers my very original trainer was a guy named George South. George South was a guy that worked for places like NWA, Jim Crockett Promotions, WCW, WWF. George has been wrestling forever now, and George has seen almost everything in the business. George still wrestles today too. Actually, he had a spring of shows with GCW and does a lot of stuff around North Carolina where he's based out of and stuff. But he's the one that he taught me how to bump. He taught me how to hit the ropes and stuff like that. My other primary trainers were Caprice Coleman from Ring of Honor and AR Fox from AEW. So a lot of my first practice matches and stuff like that were with Caprice. And then I tell people all the time that Fox is the reason that I was able to kind of start putting my particular flavor on wrestling. So those were the guys that I've trained with the most. I've done a handful of training other places, like Sebastian alluded to earlier. I trained at WXW. I've trained with Rev Pro a little bit and stuff like that. So the most influence, like as far as a peer, That's tough. That's really tough. I would probably. So my default answer is George, right? Because George is the one that gave me the tools to be able to actually be a wrestler. Like I couldn't do any of the things that I'm doing right now if it wasn't for George. This is kind of a two-part answer for me, and maybe that's cheating, but like my next answer would have been AR Fox, just because I don't know that I would be having the run that I'm having right now if it weren't for meeting Fox and training under Fox and working with Fox and stuff like that.
Would you describe someone like Matt Griffin as your mentor? And are there more people who played a similar role in your career?
He has definitely mentored me in certain aspects. There are the thing about wrestling is there is no successful wrestler without a group of people who have taken an interest in this guy or this girl and chosen to help them for whatever reason. So Matt has mentored me in a lot of ways, but there are a lot of people who have mentored me in a lot of ways. Like one guy that I've been lucky enough to work with, Shug, with the good hand in action and stuff like that, has shown me a lot of things, or talked to me about a lot of things, broached a lot of topics, and just kind of kept his eye on me since I started working with him. But there's like I said, there's a lot of guys. You know, some guys you may not have ever heard of. Some guys that a lot of people in the public maybe would never meet. But without the people who make the initial decision to be like, this is a good guy or a good person or whoever, and put that kind of faith and time in them, there's 100 faces for every one success story is something I would tell anybody about wrestling.
Before we'll talk about how important this year, 2024, has already been for your career, I would like to start a bit earlier. In 2022, you started to appear for Action Wrestling as a part of the Next Up shows. How important was Action Next Up for your career?
So Action Next Up was 2022 was this was after my first full year of like taking or attempting to take bookings and stuff like that, and I just needed a place that I could go where I knew that I could get feedback from people that meant something. So for me, Next Up was very pivotal during this time period because there were a lot of things I was doing that don't necessarily work or people don't necessarily want to see. So I was able to work with a lot of guys who were able to kind of point me in the right direction. The thing about advice is like everything isn't one size fits all. Usually it's very, very particular for a specific person and for a specific reason. So you're going to hear a lot of things, and like, if it doesn't resonate with you and you don't use it, that's fine. When you hear something that does resonate with you and you know you need to use it, take it and run with it. You know what I mean? So Next Up was the very, very start of me trying to determine what I look like in the wrestling world.
In 2023, you were a part of Action Future Showcase for the first time. You competed in non-tournament action alongside Leroy Joseph and Merrick Donovan against the Coven of the Goats, CJ Lawler, Nathan Murray, and Tank. What are your thoughts on this match, and how influential was it for your career?
So that match, the Future Showcase was something that actually happened really last second. So I was supposed to be at a fundraiser show that Saturday for a small town in Georgia, and the show ended up getting canceled because it was outdoors and it was raining. It was like storming really bad in Georgia around that time. So it got canceled. And so I found out if they had any seminar spots because Timothy Thatcher was doing a seminar. And I found out at 2 something in the morning while I was at work if they had seminar spots left. So I finished work, hopped in the car and drove to Chattanooga, got there at like 9 in the morning, got off work at like 3 in the morning, and then did a seminar with Timothy Thatcher. And that's kind of how I got that spot. That tag match was really cool for me just because it was kind of a culmination of some things that had started at the SCI Rumble that year. At the Rumble that year, I actually did a seminar with Tank and Rev. And they took an interest in me, and that helped give me a spot in the SCI Rumble that year. So getting to work with them was a lot of fun from that respect. And it definitely helped to continue the momentum that I started to build that year.
Speaking of influential, one thing I absolutely associate with you, and you already mentioned yourself, is the good hand. That also started in 2023 in action wrestling. What does the good hand mean for you, both in a professional but also in a personal way?
So that actually started out very rocky for me. As far as like, because these are a lot of guys who have been places and done things in the business, and it's like, what does that look like for me? You know what I mean? Where do I fit into that? So from a professional sense, it's like the gift that keeps on giving, right? Because there is always something going on with the good hand. We are always up to something, and that keeps us busy. So that, there's nothing better in the wrestling business than being busy. So it's a godsend from that perspective, but also from the perspective of like the guys who are in that unit. You could not ask for better guys to work with and learn from. Alex Kane is a former world champion. Sugar's a current world champion. Kevin is insane, but he's also like a wrestling encyclopedia. Casey Owens is the same way. He's a wrestling encyclopedia. So even though he doesn't have as much skin in the game, Casey's a lot closer to where I'm at than where like Sugar's at, for instance. But he just watches so much of the product, and he watches different things than I watch. So it's a way to get some additional exposure to things without having to look too hard. And so it's very cool to have that support system, because wrestling is complicated and it's hard, and you never know who you can trust, or that's a group of guys that I know has each other's backs, and that's pretty cool.
I think it was also last year when you started to appear for Southern Fried Championship Wrestling, which is an independent wrestling promotion from Monroe in Georgia. How would you describe the promotion to our listeners who haven't heard about Southern Fried Championship Wrestling before? And what are your experiences working for SFCW?
Yeah, so Southern Fried is pretty cool. It's I don't get to go out there as much as I would like to right now, but it feels like a home away from home for me, just because I cut my teeth a lot at that promotion. So it's very Southern, right? It's in the name, Southern Fried Championship Wrestling, right? We're in the great state of Georgia, and it's traditional, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I think traditionalism can go a long way in wrestling when it's treated the right way, and I feel like they're a great example of that in the Southeast wrestling ecosystem. I enjoy every time I get to go out there. Like I said, I wish I could go out there more, but right now it's just not in the cards. But one thing I do want to say about Southern Fried specifically is that they're the reason I got to wrestle AC Mack. I wrestled AC Mack at their anniversary show Shindig last year, which was another thing that really helped me to keep my momentum going, and something that I'll forever be grateful for. So I'm always going to have love for Southern Fried.
I feel like all of the things we just talked about and I mentioned led to this year, to 2024 for you. That started with a stay from, I think, early January to mid-February here in Germany. During that time, you trained at the WXW Academy in Gelsenkirchen, as you referred to earlier. What can you tell us about your experience at the WXW Academy?
WXW's training is very strenuous, and I mean that in the best way possible. Like they make sure that no stone is left unturned. The three trainers that they have there are absolutely pros in every way, as far as like the way that they go about training, making sure everybody feels comfortable, making sure you're properly warmed up, making sure you properly cool down, taking the time to make sure that you understand what you're going through before you go through it, and things like that. They also, the three of them, have their own specific kind of like inclinations in wrestling. And this is something that, like, if you train a lot of places, you'll come to find out, is that trainers have their own particular lean. That's just how wrestling works. Everybody likes their own flavor of ice cream. So it was a great place as far as getting to polish yourself. I would never not tell anybody to go to train there. Like the academy was absolutely like a breath of fresh air for me.
You not only trained there, but you also had 2 matches, both at WXW Wrestling Academy Wednesday Night Heat against Nick Schreier on January 17th, and another one later on alongside your partner DT against Rotation and Julia, as well as Amy Heartbeat and Romero. What are your thoughts on these matches that you had in the WXW Wrestling Academy at the Wednesday Night Heat shows?
So with Nick, it was a little bit jarring just because I wasn't as familiar with him going into it. Obviously, like, the great thing about training with Rotation and doing shows around Europe is, like, Julia and Rotation I was both kind of familiar with. By the time we got to that match, I did not have that same opportunity with Nick because it was very close to when I first got in the country. I didn't get to watch as much tape on it as I would have liked. Or anything like that. I did have a lot of fun. It's that was my first match internationally, so it was a little bit of a culture shock wrestling in front of a crowd that was not American, just because things do not translate 100%. So that was something that I had to adjust to. Like, the crowds are different everywhere. It's kind of like in Japan, they're very respectful. They do the clapping and they're very hushed until it's time to clap and stuff like that. So there's a lot of crowds that it took me a little bit to read. And that was one of those instances. Nick is great though. Nick is very good at what he does. As far as the second match, obviously, like, Rotation's a trainer there. There's a reason he's a trainer there. He's phenomenal at what he does. Very fast paced, which obviously is kind of the opposite for me. So that was an interesting clash. It was awesome getting to tag with Deity there. I love anytime I get to work with her. It's funny because Julia and Rotation do certain things the same way when they wrestle. So it's kind of funny to watch because it's like a little mini him. Amy is very athletic for her size too. Very athletic. Like, surprisingly athletic. I think everybody in that match pretty much was a good fit. It was very slightly different styles, right? So styles tell stories. You had a mix of new faces that I hadn't gotten to meet before. And then you also had, Rotation and Julia, who I had a bit more history with by this time. So it was a very fun match. That's probably one of my favorite matches I had overseas.
You already mentioned her. Your partner DT went on this excursion alongside you. And did it feel special for you to experience this time in Germany and also the Netherlands, for example, together?
Yeah, being able to travel with her was a godsend. She's originally from overseas. She has family out that way and stuff like that. So it was very cool to be able to just kind of go and explore and see new things. And, like, before we got to the wrestling part of our trip, we went and, like, saw the Coliseum and went to Barcelona and did all kind of fun stuff. So it was it was like a giant adventure. It was very cool.
Alongside DT and Julia, who you already mentioned as well, you also had a match against Gaia Glass, George Madison, and Feas Aguilar for Pro Wrestling Holland in the Netherlands on February 4th. How did it feel to wrestle for Pro Wrestling Holland?
Pro Wrestling Holland was awesome. It was like a giant party. It was like a giant party. Everyone was super happy to be there. The crowd was super interactive. It was a whole lot of fun. I would love to go back. I would absolutely love to go back.
You also had 2 more bookings here in Germany, one in Dortmund for Legion Wrestling against Askeladd Gormson and Phil Black on January 28th, and another one for Dockers Wrestling for the Dockers title against Ray Murphy on February 10th. What do you think about these two matches and maybe also these two promotions?
So I can't say enough about Legion or Dockers because they took great care of me while I was over there. It was, and the match at Dockers was a little bit better in my opinion, just because I was more comfortable. I was more comfortable in my own skin. Again, it's kind of an adjustment when you go overseas and you're not sure how your presentation is going to translate to foreign fans. So I feel like at Legion, I kind of suffered from that a little bit. Both of those guys are great, though. It was a great learning experience. It was a lot of fun, and I would love to go back to either of those spots. The Dockers match has a special place in my heart just because that was one of my last matches over there, and I felt like it was one of my best matches over there. Like I was definitely more comfortable by that time. So that holds a special place in my heart. But both of those were great reps for me while I was overseas.
After returning to the US, you started to have a successful time in action wrestling. You won against Big Dave at Action Take Me Higher on March 29th, and later on also against O'Shea Edwards and Noonan Fight Club on May 16th. This led to you getting a title shot for the Action title on June 21st against One Called Manners. How much did this match mean to you? And would you say that it was one of the most important matches of your career so far?
Yeah, I would definitely say it was. It was that match with Manders was essentially the culmination of over a year's worth of work. And unfortunately I fell short in that, right? But it was that's by far one of the best matches I've ever had. Yeah, that was the culmination of a year's worth of work, and a lot of things went into making it to that spot. And I wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't change anything about any of that. I would work with Manders 100 times. It's I'm almost at a loss for words because I haven't really fully internalized some of it yet, and I think that's just because with wrestling, it's always on to the next thing. It's very hard to kind of celebrate certain things you've accomplished or gotten to do because you're always thinking about that next spot. The next place you're going, the next title you're challenging for, whatever it may be. So, but I was immensely excited and grateful for that match, and hopefully I'll be able to circle back and I'll be able to run that again with him one of these days. Because I think the gold would look a lot better over here.
Speaking of importance, you were a part of one of the best, most critically acclaimed shows of the WrestleMania week this year. You were part of Action Dean as a part of the match of the good hand against O'Shea Edwards, Robert Dreisker, and Lawrence Roman, who, of course, we all know here from WXW, Lawrence Roman, current WXW Unified Champion, Robert Dreisker, head coach of the WXW Academy. How does it feel to have been part of such a match and also such an important show?
So, like, just to start with the match, that was my first Mania Week match ever, which I thought was immensely cool. I was immensely excited to get the ring with O'Shea. I was immensely excited to be in the ring with both of the guys from WXW. Because Robert at the time I think was still the unified champ. Both of those guys are such pros at what they do, and they understand what they do, so that makes it a lot easier. It was very nerve wracking though, because like if you go back and look at if you go back and look at the list of matches from the Action Dean show, it is insane. Like the amount and the quality of talent on that show was absolutely insane. So being able to share a locker room with a lot of those guys, some of those guys for the first time, that was very surreal. Like my favorite thing from that event, honestly, like outside of anything to do with the wrestling or anything, was a year prior to that, I was doing a seminar with Timothy Thatcher, and then at Dean, I was able to share a locker room with Timothy Thatcher. So that was a really cool, like, kind of landmark thing for me. Like being part of Dean was an amazing experience that I was extremely grateful for. The entire experience was just it was it was life-changing. So it was a very great experience for me.
We already talked about Southern Fried Championship Wrestling, a promotion we didn't really talk about before on this podcast. And in this year, you appeared for 2 other promotions we, I think, never talked about before on this podcast. Renegade Independent Pro Wrestling and Deep South Wrestling. What can you tell us about your matches there and maybe also the promotions?
So I'll start with Deep South because they're a little bit older. So Deep South actually originally started in the 80s. So that was a territory owned by Nick Patrick's father, Jody Hamilton. He was one of the assassins, and he owned a territory for a handful of years in the late 80s. And they ended up shutting down for a little while. And then the next time they got brought back was actually in the mid 2000s. Deep South was essentially like an FCW or an OVW. It was a territory system for developmental for WWE in the mid 2000s. That's why you can find clips of like The Miz wrestling for the Deep South title and stuff like that is because of the fact that it was a territory for them in the mid 2000s. And then they recently restarted running. I think they restarted in 2021, maybe. So this run that they're on right now is very recent in the grand scheme of things. Very recent, but Nick Patrick is still the owner. It's an interesting show, to say the least, because you've got a lot of skill levels in there. You've got a lot of experienced versus unexperienced guys. But it's a great environment for learning as long as you're willing to listen. Getting to work with Nick is always cool. Nick's probably one of the chillest people I've ever met in wrestling, even when I'm beating up half of his roster. So he's a good guy. As far as Renegade shows, RIPW is a promotion owned by a guy named the Renegade Enforcer. That's definitely a spot where it's like a lot of guys are cutting their teeth right now. A lot of guys who don't necessarily always get opportunities that maybe they should are able to get spots there and show people why they're worth it. I had a really fun match against their champion, a guy named Jay Lucas. Shouts out to Jay Lucas because he's a great worker. That's the only time I've gotten to wrestle for him so far. Hopefully, I can circle back, down the road, as long as dates make sense and everything like that.
Another promotion that you appear for is Southern Honor Wrestling, and this year you even became a part of the story around Matt Griffin and Adam Priest as Action Wrestling representatives. What can you tell us about your matches you had at Southern Honor this year in this context of the story?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing with Southern Honor is like it's a place I ended up almost on accident, like because I was lucky enough to be doing what I was doing with Action. It's kind of how I ended up getting brought in with that, and it feels nice to represent the winning company. You know what I mean? But it's a lot of fun to be there. I like their production a lot. I would love to fight some of the guys they got on their roster. So I'm patiently waiting to see what happens there with that. It feels good to be on the nice side of history, though.
My last question before Morbo will talk to you about what is next for you. Also, after returning from Germany, you were a part of the Scenic City Rumble in March, and later on you were a part of the Action Futures Showcase tournament again, but this year you were really a part of the tournament. So you were in non-tournament action as the year before, but you were part of the actual tournament. You had a first round match against Tim Bosby and Cody Fluffman, and on day 2 of the Scenic City Invitational, you also appeared in non-tournament action as a part of the match of the Good Hand against Len Hale, Rachel Armstrong, and Rob Killjoy. Would you say that this year's Scenic City Invitational weekend felt like the next step for you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's I wish I'd gotten farther in futures, but watching those tournament matches was a great research opportunity for me personally. It was great being in such a varied locker room. We had a lot of Northeast cats in the building, a lot of Midwest guys in the building, a lot of farther South guys, like guys from Florida and stuff like that in the building. A lot of different styles in the building. Paul London was there, which was awesome. I had great conversations with him. the work didn't get done in the ring, but that's something to come back to. As it were, I'm happy that we got the opportunity to wrestle on night 2, the Scenic City Invitational. It's always easy when you're working with guys like Suge and Casey because they understand the assignment. So as far as that goes, it was a pretty great experience. I would like to be able to do more as far as the Scenic City Invitational goes. So I'm just trying to keep my foot on the gas. That way next year they understand why I deserve to be in it.
So far, you have been predominantly active in the southeast of the US. Do you have aspirations to also appear in other regions of the US? And are there certain promotions that you would like to appear for?
Yeah, so I actually just debuted in the Midwest at a show called Naptown Pro Wrestling in Indiana. And I would love to go back out there. But I am actively trying to branch out of the Southeast as much as possible. So like right now, my biggest goals are just get in the Midwest, get in the Northeast. If I can get to the West Coast or the Pacific Northwest and stuff like that, that's the plan. I'm just kind of trying to do my research and find dates that line up and get carloads together and just try to do the trips the right way. Because at a certain point, that's all you really can do is try to get out there and get your face shown. You know what I mean? So that's actively my goal right now. Before I was working on consistency. I've gotten that part pretty much down pat. So at this point, I'm just trying to branch out as many new places as possible.
Is returning to WXW and having a match on a main show or maybe even a festival weekend like 16 Carat or Tag Team Festival also a goal for you?
Yeah, I would love to come back and get to work with those guys. Wrestling's never say never, right? So I would love to at some point. There are a lot of shows in Europe in general I'd love to come work for, just as far as, WXW in Germany, obviously, Rev Pro, Progress, just to name a few. There are so many hotbeds for wrestling in Europe right now that I feel like we're having to rebuild because of the network. And because of guys getting taken for NXT UK and stuff like that. So now that a lot of those guys are returning to the scene, I feel like it's just, I feel like it's kind of a hotbed right now. And I would like to be a part of that mix to some extent. So anywhere and anytime, I would love to come back.
Are there any upcoming matches and shows that you would like to talk about?
I've got a lot of things coming up. A lot of it is at a place called New South, where I've been working a lot more here recently. I recently debuted for them. A lot of stuff with Action coming up. I want to say that we have 3 Action shows in August alone, just between new venues and stuff like that. So the good hand is trying to keep it rocking and rolling and hold everything down. It's great to be busy. But it's also like that's the challenge of it is like staying busy, but also like trying to find the time to reach out to new places. There's not like a particular. Actually, that's a lot. There is a particular match I'd like to plug. This one's a little bit further out, so this is September 27th, I believe. I've got a bunkhouse bus barn brawl with Big Dave at the brewing company we just wrestled at. I'm pretty sure it's going to be one of the most painful matches I've ever had because I don't do a lot of hardcore stuff and I don't do a lot of street fights. But I'm very excited to put Big Dave through a couple doors. So I definitely want to plug that. That's September 27th at Action. I'm very excited for that match. I'm sure there are other ones coming up. I've got a couple promos I got to drop pretty soon on socials and stuff like that for some upcoming shows. So. But that's the one that's like is violently sticking out in my head right now. So,
okay, Tyler, that's it. We're at the end of the interview, and as always, the stage is yours. You can plug and promote anything you want.
It's pretty simple. At Tyler Stevens Pro on everything that's Instagram, that's X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it. Tyler Stevens on Facebook, Tyler Stevens on YouTube. I know it doesn't look like there's a lot on my YouTube right now. There's a lot of matches that are about to get unprivated. So I'm about to have a lot of content on my YouTube as far as some of my higher quality matches. Yeah, find me on my socials. I'm always wrestling. Pretty much. I've got at least 2 shows a week, pretty much every week for the rest of the year. So I'm just trying to stay busy. Trying to keep everything out there. Like I said, putting out more match content and stuff like that. So I'm just trying to keep my foot on the gas. I've been very lucky. And so I'm trying to just put myself in the right spaces at the right times.
Thank you very much for coming on the show, Tyler. I think this was a very cool interview. Sebastian and I, we follow your career closely, and yeah, we are looking forward what's next for you in the upcoming weeks, months, and future.
Yeah, I appreciate y'all having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you very much to you, Mo, as always, and also to you, Florian, as always, but especially to you, Tyler. As Mo said, we've been following your career for quite some time now. You and I have met in person multiple times in Germany and in the US. So we are really happy to have you as our guest today. And therefore, thank you for taking the time. And also thank you to our listeners. And I hope you will listen to us in the future again. Goodbye.